I didn't expect my daughter's happiest moment that day to become the reason we ended up in an emergency room. Looking back, what stays with me isn't the shouting, it's the silence afterward. My brother-in-law's wedding was held at a large country club outside the city. It was one of those events where everyone seemed determined to prove how happy they were. Expensive flowers, loud music, endless photographs. I arrived late. The Air Force had kept me tied up at an official function that morning, and I barely had time to change before bringing my 7-year-old daughter, Emma, to the ceremony. Emma loved weddings. She loved the dresses, the music, and especially the dancing. She'd spent 2 weeks practicing spins in our living room. My mother-in-law, Diane, had never hidden her feelings about me. She wasn't openly hostile most of the time. She preferred something quieter, little comments. Questions about why I was always deployed, observations about how children needed mothers at home, suggestions that military careers were fine for men but complicated for women. I learned years ago that arguing with her changed nothing, so I smiled, I showed up, I kept the peace, for my husband's sake, for Emma's sake. The reception had barely started when Emma wandered toward the dance floor. The DJ was playing something upbeat. A few children were dancing near the front while adults laughed around the tables. I watched her from across the room. She looked completely carefree. Then I saw Diane stand up. At first, I thought she was going to join her. Instead, she crossed the floor quickly. The music was loud, but not loud enough to hide what she said. "Get her off there." People turned. Emma froze. Diane grabbed her wrist. "No child of a soldier is going to ruin my son's day." The room seemed to pause. "Get her out." Emma looked terrified, not crying, just confused, the kind of confusion children have when an adult suddenly becomes unreasonable. I was moving before I realized it. By the time I reached them, Diane had already started pulling Emma toward the edge of the floor. I took my daughter's hand. "Let go." The words came out calmer than I felt. Diane released her. For a second, nobody spoke. Then someone changed the subject. Someone else laughed nervously. The music continued. The wedding moved forward, as if nothing had happened. I should have left then. Part of me knew it. But my husband was standing beside his brother on one of the most important days of his life. So I stayed for another hour, then another. Emma barely spoke. Eventually, she complained of feeling sick. I assumed the stress had finally caught up with her. When she started running a high fever and became dizzy, I stopped worrying about family drama and started worrying about my child. We left immediately. The emergency room was crowded. Doctors moved quickly once they evaluated her symptoms. What followed became a blur of tests, questions, and waiting. Every parent knows that feeling, the helplessness, the bargaining. The fear that settles into your chest while strangers examine the person you love most. 2 hours after leaving the wedding, a police officer approached me in the waiting area. At first, I thought something had happened to my husband. Instead, he asked questions about Emma, questions about what occurred at the reception. Apparently, one of the guests had reported concerns after witnessing Diane drag a child across the dance floor. Hospital staff had heard about it while gathering background information. The officer wasn't accusing anyone of a crime. He was doing what officers do when a report involving a child reaches them, verifying facts. Documenting statements, making sure there wasn't something more serious happening. For the first time that day, the story wasn't being controlled by family members deciding what did or didn't matter. It was simply being examined objectively. An hour later, I stepped away briefly to change. I had another obligation immediately after the hospital. There wasn't time to go home. The only clothing I had available was my Air Force dress uniform stored in my vehicle. When I returned, I was wearing my dress blues. I didn't think much about it. The uniform was practical, nothing more. Then Diane arrived. Someone from the family had called her. She entered the waiting area looking determined, defensive, ready for an argument, until she noticed the hospital administrator speaking with me. Then she noticed the officer. Then she noticed the uniform. I watched the realization happen in stages. A nurse walked past and asked whether the colonel needed anything. Diane stared. For several seconds, she didn't move. Finally, she approached, much slower than before, her eyes fixed on the insignia. They said a colonel was coming. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Then she looked directly at me. "That's you." I nodded. Nothing else. There wasn't much to say. The strange thing is that the moment wasn't satisfying. People imagine these situations feel like victories. They don't. Not when your child is sitting behind a hospital curtain. Not when you've spent years trying to earn acceptance from people determined not to give it. Diane looked smaller somehow, not because of the rank, because the story she'd told herself no longer worked. The irresponsible soldier, the absent mother, the outsider, none of it matched the woman standing in front of her. The officer eventually finished his questions. The doctors determined Emma would recover fully. The fever had been caused by an infection unrelated to the wedding incident. The relief nearly brought me to tears. That was all I cared about. Not being right, not being respected, just hearing that she would be okay. Before leaving, Diane stopped beside me one last time. For a moment, I thought she was preparing another excuse. Instead, she looked toward Emma's room. I was wrong. Simple words, late words, but genuine ones. I thanked her for coming. Nothing more. Months have passed since that day. Our relationship never returned to what it was before. In some ways, that's a loss. In other ways, it's honest. Diane treats me differently now. More respectfully. More carefully. But the real change happened inside me. I stopped shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. I stopped accepting insults in exchange for temporary peace. Not because I wanted power, because Emma was watching. And one day she'll remember that wedding. Maybe not every detail, maybe not every word. But I hope she'll remember something important, that dignity doesn't require revenge. Sometimes it just requires standing still long enough for the truth to arrive on its own.